Hello, this is David from DN Cognitive Counseling. I'm sure you all heard of what happened to the McCloskeys in St. Louis, Missouri, where a group of protesters broke into the private streets of their neighborhood and they came outside with guns. In their claim, they said that they were defending their property, and the protesters said that they didn't make any threats. So we have a situation where what should we do and what should happen in a case like that? Now, the prosecuting attorney, the district attorney, not the prosecuting, the district attorney decided to bring charges against them. And I'd like to break down this case because I think it carries a lot of facets of a lot of what's going on in the world today and how scary things can get when politics gets in the way of justice. And many times that people of different races and cultures have been the victim of this discretion that prosecutors have to be able to bring cases or not bring cases based upon politics. Sadly, that leads people to feel a lot of injustice in the system. And I'm hoping this will be another illustration of how easy it is to see injustice based upon politics and how dangerous it can become. For those of you who are not familiar or have not seen it, you will see some of the video of what happened with the McCloskeys and the prosecutor, the district attorney, who is deciding to bring charges. And we'll talk a little bit about that and psychologically to see whether or not there's any other motivations that she may have and why she's doing what she's doing. So let's take a look at what happens in this scenario, and we're going to talk a little bit about the different points of view to look at it.
I really thought it was storming the Bastille, that we would be dead and the house would be burned. And
there was no reason whatsoever for them to be out there in an aggressive, confrontational way.
So here you have 2 points of view. You have the owner of the home saying he felt like it was a storming of the Bastille. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with the reference, it basically is a bunch of protesters destroying a military base or place during the French Revolution. This was their home, and this is their area. Then you have the other person saying they had no reason being out there on their lawn of their home. Okay, just think about that for a minute. They had no reason to be out on the lawn of their home.
Tonight, both sides of a controversial confrontation in the Central West End are defending their actions. Good evening, I'm Ann Allred.
And I'm Mike Bush. People across the country are weighing in on the encounter, which had a couple pointing guns at protesters outside their home.
But did they commit a crime? Our Jenna Barnes is live tonight with what she learned. Jenna?
Yeah, and the couple says the protesters broke down this gate to get into the neighborhood, and you can see it is damaged, but the protesters say gate was open when they came through. I talked to a constitutional law professor who says the critical piece of this happened beyond the gate.
Why are you threatened?
New video shows the tense moments Patricia McCloskey and her husband Mark pointed guns at protesters outside their Central West End home Sunday night.
I just want to correct one thing. You'll see that Mrs. McClosky does point guns at people. Mr. McClosky actually doesn't point guns at anybody. He holds the gun in a manner like this, and he's putting it on his shoulder. He actually doesn't point it at anybody, as you'll see in the video.
Protesters say they were on their way to Mayor Lyda Crewson's house to demand her resignation when the McCloskeys came out of their mansion armed.
We must protect the rights to peacefully protest, and any attempts to chill it through intimidation or use of force will not be tolerated.
Now, that's the circuit attorney, the district attorney that I mentioned earlier, who says that we have to allow people to protest peacefully, which makes a lot of sense. The question becomes when it happens towards your property. Now, people have the right to peacefully protest. They don't have a right to peacefully protest on your property or destroy your property. The McCloskeys' claim is that they were being threatened, that they were going to destroy them, burn their house down, all these other things. And it was the use of the weapon in an inappropriate manner, I must say. When they were holding their guns, they're holding them inappropriately, which tells you they don't have much training or understanding much how to use them. But staying away from that for a minute, the district attorney here is stating something that's a little frightening, is that we can't allow people to protect their property because it gets in the way of protesting. David Dorn was killed in the same place just a few nights earlier than this. So the idea that the McCloskeys might have been afraid or scared that something bad could happen is not out of the realm of possibility. So when you're going to err on the side of saying, well, if this was your brother, your sister, if this was your family, and protesters broke through a gate, and let's assume for a minute, because the gate was gated closed, and they're going to show you more pictures later of what the gate looked like so you can actually see what it looked like. But assume for a minute that protesters break through a gate, coming towards your property or being on your property or coming close to your property. Do you think that maybe, given the tension, that there's a possibility that you might be afraid, that things might go wrong? So the nature of their fear, then the question is, what are they allowed to do or not allowed to do according to the law of that state? But the nature here of what she's saying, that the only thing is that we have to be worried about is the protesters' ability to protest without any regard for the people's property, is a little bit scary from the standpoint of anyone out there who owns a home, or even if you don't own a home, you have an apartment building that you live in. Would you say that protesters can come into your apartment and start protesting in your apartment and start breaking your things, then you have no right to protect your property?
Attorney Kim Gardner released a video statement Monday promising action.
And I would use every extent of Missouri law to hold individuals accountable.
But experts say Missouri law may actually support the McCloskeys.
A lot of people are not familiar with Missouri's castle doctrine, which we have extended to real properties.
SLU constitutional and criminal law professor Anders Walker says Missouri's castle doctrine is more robust than other states, meaning people can use deadly force to protect not only their home, but also their land. He says the private Portland place where the McCloskeys live counts.
I think that those streets are owned collectively, and it's essentially like walking onto private land.
And that means, in his view, the protesters who on a public street would be practicing their First Amendment rights were the ones breaking the law.
So there's actually, one, no right to protest, and then the protesters themselves are trespassing.
You may have seen some text on the screen during the new video of this encounter. We want to let you know that is commentary, and it is the photographers, not ours. Tonight we've seen a couple of private security cars drive by the couple's home, but so far all is quiet here.
So you hear from the attorney that the nature of what the McCloskeys were doing would have been protected by law. And yet the district attorney is basically disregarding that. Now, the attorney could be wrong. The attorney could have their own political agenda. So I found what the castle doctrine was in a 2015 video by another district attorney who explains what that doctrine is and the nature of what it means and what it covers. Now, it's important because you always want to look at something before an event takes place. After an event takes place, you get a lot of bias and a lot of biased opinions based upon what people believe. So when you look at something prior, it's more helpful in understanding a concept.
We wanted to get you on at least to talk about the castle doctrine as you see it, because it is very confusing. So how do you read the castle doctrine?
Well, it is confusing. Basically, in Missouri law, and it's not the easiest set of laws to understand, but basically, if you have a reasonable belief that you are about to experience the use or imminent use of unlawful force on your property, you're allowed to use deadly force in response.
So, the castle doctrine allows people, if they believe that deadly force, that their property is going to be destroyed, or that they're in imminent danger, that they're allowed to use deadly force. That's how far the law goes. Now, what did the McCloskeys do? They shot nobody. They didn't discharge their firearms. They held them. Given the fact that you're allowed to shoot, now, had the McCloskeys actually shot, based upon that doctrine, there could be made a case stating they felt threatened and they needed to shoot in order to disperse the crowd from the imminent danger they felt. But that's not what happened here. They held weapons in a manner to intimidate people to stay away. And if you watch the video, it's exactly what happens. The protesters who sit and get testy with them stay on the outskirts of their property, but they don't go onto the property. They don't go past. Basically, the weapons do the job of saying, whoa, back up. So it's very interesting that the nature of this rule allows people to shoot another person according to that law, yet they're being charged for not just holding the weapon, which would be an assault, not a murder. So if they would have shot somebody under this doctrine, it sounds as if they would have had a defense under that law. But that's not what's going on, which begs the question why the attorney, the district attorney, would be bringing a case so controversial to the forefront at this time.
March into St. Louis Mayor Elida Cruzen's home to demand her resignation after she read off the names and addresses of those who wanted to defund the police department during a Facebook Live last week.
By the way, that's why the protesters were going to this community to begin with, based upon this person that came out and gave this information out.
Force Emma Hogue spoke with that couple today. Emma is live for us tonight in the Central West End. Claire, Steve, I want to show you that gate protesters managed to get through last night. Take a look. You'll notice this is a private street.
Now you'll notice that this gate is the same gate you saw before in the other video at night.
Considered private property. Tonight, protesters tell me they were peaceful the entire time, but that couple I spoke with says they were threatened.
It was like the storming of the Bastille. The gate came down and a large crowd of very angry, shouting, aggressive people poured through.
Tonight, the couple seen in this now viral video is detailing what they say was strictly self-defense. Mark McCloskey and his wife stood on their patio Sunday night pointing guns at a crowd of protesters.
I was terrified that we'd be murdered within seconds, that our house would be burned down, that our pets would be killed.
McCloskey says he and his wife called 911 and grabbed their guns as they heard the crowd approaching from afar.
Now this is a very vital point. If the McCloskeys were being the aggressors, why would they have called 911? If the McCloskeys were being the aggressors, why would they be sitting and pointing people to go away? So I don't think psychologically from their behavior, you could say that they may have misinterpreted the crowd's intention. You know, they could have thought incorrectly that the crowd was going to be dangerous to them. That you could make the case for. You could say the crowd itself was not going to do anything to them, and that they misinterpreted that large number coming through, and then they went to defend themselves. But to state that the McCloskeys were trying to, in bad faith, trying to be detrimental and hurtful to anybody else, as I said, if you take a look how they're holding these weapons, it's sadly comical because it's inappropriate. It's not the way that you would hold a weapon if you're going to discharge it in any way, shape, or form. This is just a form of intimidation. And it sounds to me, from watching their behavior, that they are tremendously afraid. They're using aggression as a means of starting to say to somebody, back away. Their fight response actually here is actually kicking in, and what they're doing is protecting what they think that they're in danger from.
Video from another angle shows protesters chanting while walking into their private gated community, which appears to be open. But McCloskey says a key is required and later shared these photos of the gate destroyed.
So if you notice the gate, in terms of its openness, it was open, but it looks like by force. And if you saw later on those chains, it was holding everything in place to put it back the way that it was. But the gate itself was forcibly open. Now, that doesn't mean that the protesters would not have been peaceful to the people or to other, because they wanted to get to where they wanted to get to. But it does show you that the McCloskeys reasonably would be afraid. And I think from what you're seeing in the video, you could tell these people are not sitting there going, oh, this is wonderful. And they weren't shooting at people, trying to say, we want to just take people out. They never discharged their weapon. And again, From what we know about the Castle Doctrine, at least from the lawyer's explanation from two of them, there is a strong element that they could have shot at them, even killing some, and made the case that it was self-defense from the law.
I stood up and announced loudly, "This is private property. Please go back. Leave." As soon as I said the words private property, it enraged the crowd. There was then a horde of people coming through the broken gate.
The couple owns a law firm and says they've spent decades practicing personal injury and civil rights cases. Sunday night, McCloskeys says protesters threatened to light his house on fire and kill his dog. He says police didn't come until after protesters left.
That is a very scary thing, by the way, for any family to have to deal with, is that when the police do not respond to a situation where you have so many people in that type of fearful situation, this could have been a much greater tragedy. I'm very thankful that none of that did happen and it didn't escalate to that level, but it very well could have. What's also interesting is what he does for a living and the fact that he's a civil rights attorney, which means his intent for most of the time is defending those people who have been victimized most by the law. Now, he himself, again from his own account, is talking about feeling like a victim himself.
One fella standing right in front of me pulled out 2 loaded pistol magazines, clicked them together and said, "You're next." That was the first death threat we got that night.
At the end of the day, if it's private property or public property, we're trying to get a message across.
Rasheen Aldridge helped lead the protest, organized by a group called Expect Us. He says protesters were peaceful and no threats were ever made. When asked why the group marched on private property, he told us this.
Just like in many disobedient protests, even if it was in the 60s, you break laws, you make people feel uncomfortable. We're not doing anything where we're hurting anybody or putting anybody in danger.
Now, there is a very big difference between protesting on private property as opposed to public property. You have a right to assemble and peacefully protest. You have a right to do that. You don't have that right in somebody's living room. They have a right to protect their private property. And what happens is that you have 2 different rights here. You have the right to peacefully assemble against the right to private property. And there are 2 conflicting rights in this particular case. It is true that you have a right to peacefully assemble, but when you go into private property, you then have the ability to be arrested for trespassing. Now, what's interesting about this entire situation is not about the trespassing aspect. It's the fear aspect. And again, the McCloskeys, I think, are stating how they felt and how fearful they were. And I don't think that there's any reasonable person out there, given the same situation, would not feel the same type of fear. And I don't think it has anything to do with anybody's personnel, belief system or not. If a group of 50, 60, 70, 100, 200 people angrily were coming through a place next to your house, and then you saw this, it would bring up fear.
Tonight, McCloskey tells me he spent years defending victims of police brutality, including one case News 4 has followed for over a year now. Details on that coming up tonight on News 4 at 6.
Now, what Emma Hogg here is explaining is how that when he says he was defending people, for civil rights issues, she's saying, yes, that we've been following this news story about what he's been doing to defend. So I don't think you could say this is a man whose intent is to be hurtful and harmful to anybody. In fact, I'm sure that he probably, from the statements that she's making, was in favor of actual peaceful protest from the mindset of being a civil rights attorney. The problem is that he was not in favor of his family or house being attacked because of it and felt he had the right to defend himself. And again, I think that there's a very strong case for that to be made. Now, let's talk a little bit about the district attorney, and let's get a little bit more of her mindset and about what happened here and her understanding, because there's the Castle Doctrine and the law, which seems pretty clear in terms of killing somebody. And again, this is not killing somebody. This is pointing a gun at somebody which in most states would be considered assault. But let's take a look and let's think about her mindset.
Welcome back to News 11 at 4. A local political candidates meeting was held online today, but stealing the show was a feud between St. Louis Circuit Attorney Kim Gardner and her opponent in the upcoming election. Mary.
Now remember, Kim Gardner is the district attorney bringing the charges against them.
Pat Carl. News 11's Vic Faust has more.
Mary Pat Carl wants to replace St. Louis Circuit Attorney Kim Gardner. She was the city's lead homicide attorney and a prosecutor for 15 years, but left after Gardner was elected. Today, the two debated on who was more fit for the position. Carl, who battles Bell's palsy in her face, says it has only strengthened her for this job.
The power of resilience, that ability we have to dig deep in the most difficult times and push through pain and actually make a change in our lives for better. That's the same message that I want to bring to the criminal justice system.
Gardner's message is everyone's life matters. She also went after a local and state leader.
I tell you, who is not going to let me stop reforming the system? It's the police union and the business manager, Jeff Rorter. Doesn't matter. It's the Trump wannabe Missouri Attorney General, along with others.
Now, again, I don't care about your political beliefs here, but I'm going to tell you what frightens me in reference to this is when you're starting to hear the politics of one side or another. And I don't care if this was somebody was saying about Barack Obama, or somebody was saying about Jimmy Carter, or somebody was saying about Ronald Reagan. When we want justice, one of the reasons why justice is supposed to be blind, and it's supposed to be that blindfold. The problem is that when justice becomes political, it opens up the door for people to say, instead of justice, injustice. And I've been in this system for many, many years and dealing with it. And there's a lot of injustice in our justice system. And I wish there wasn't. I really do. But the way to not make injustice is to not continue to make injustice. And it doesn't work when you have an agenda and you want to go in opposite direction. It actually makes it actually worse, because then it rationalizes why you can go back and forth, and you just get more and more injustice as you go along.
That continue to have lies and divisive rhetoric.
Carl says the circuit attorney's office is dysfunctional and nobody wants to stay. Carl left the office after Gardner was elected.
We're down to 17 trial attorneys. Then cases are being handed off from one attorney to another. That's not stability. And cases are getting dismissed in a courtroom because there isn't anyone there to try them.
You have no facts to back up lies what Ms. Carl is talking about in terms.
Now, Ms. Carl's saying is that she's being derelict in her duties of prosecuting cases. And I want you to remember that, and we'll talk about it to see if there's any evidence of that with another clip.
There's 17 attorneys know the facts, but she can't because she's also talking about the lies and the misinformation perpetuated by Jeff Rorter, who supports her.
I don't have a relationship with Jeff Rorter. I didn't serve in the House with him. I didn't co-sponsor legislation with Jeff Rorter. I'm not friends with Jeff Rorter. I don't have a police officer endorsement here in 2020. I sat in a room with my opponent. She also asked for that endorsement in 2016.
Gardner denies what Carl alleges about Rorter and says this election is about her continuing to reform, while Carl says it's time to rebuild the department.
I don't know what Ms. Carl's talking about in terms of a police endorsement. When she's talking about waging war on police, let's talk about being accountable and making sure we deal with the issues we're talking about right now that led to the unfortunate death of Mr. George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Philando Castile, Mike Brown, and many others.
For News 11, Vic Faust.
Now again, the nature of being upset about the things that have happened, absolutely. But if it starts to cloud judgment and create bias in the way that you administer the law because of your anger, then we have a problem.
Good morning, everybody. First, my heart goes out to the wife, the family, and loved ones of former St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department Captain and retired Moline Acres Chief, Police Chief David Dorn.
Now, David Dorn was the man who was killed as trying to protect a pawn shop in Missouri. He was a retired police officer and sadly was killed in the night of a violent protest.
Who was tragically killed last night while responding to an alarm at Lee's Pawn Shop. We hope for the speedy recovery for the 4 other officers who were injured last night. Yesterday was filled with peaceful protests in the city, throughout St. Louis region, and around the country to speak out against the tragic death of Mr. George Floyd. As an African-American woman, I understand and share the deep frustrations and anger about the inequities of the criminal justice system. It's why I first ran as circuit attorney and why I will continue to do everything in my power to create a fair and more equitable criminal justice system. I fully support and strongly believe in the power of nonviolent protests and shine a light on the systemic racism and discriminatory practices that are in our criminal justice system. But what happened last night was not about nonviolent protests. What happened last night were a small group of individuals who chose to benefit off the pain and suffering of our community and use it as an excuse to cause insensible, undamageable harm to our communities and to engage in senseless violence. But I will continue to uphold the right to peaceful protests, but I want to be clear. I will use the full power of the law and my officer to prosecute and hold accountable anyone who murders police officers, who shoot at police officers, or harm anyone in my community. These people who committed the heinous acts are not interested in finding solutions to the intractable racism that is at the heart of these protests. They are using this opportunity to cause chaos. So to everyone, understand that you will be held responsible for the senseless acts of violence. But to the peaceful protesters out there doing the right things for the right reasons, continue to make your voice heard and to help us root out those whose actions work directly against justice for all. Under the laws, depending on what they're arrested for, that determines how they'll be held. We have right now under our laws, you're held for 24 hours before you have to have charges issued. And if no charges are issued, those individuals will be released under the laws of the state of Missouri. So depending on if a charge is brought within the 24 hours, determines when they will be held or not.
Okay, that's very important, because at the end of that, they were trying to find out why these protesters were being let out of jail without being charged. And she's basically saying, well, there's no charges brought, so didn't do anything, so release them. And there's a lot of controversy about that, about what happened there, and which is the reason why you saw the other attorney who was running against her was bringing that up. So there's a lot of things to unpack in her statement. Forgetting about some of the miswords, but the issue that she's talking about and the anger that she has, and again, I know that some of you disagree and think that there's no aspects of racism that go on in the world and everything's fine and nobody has any issues. From working in the system, if I told you about the cases that I was personally involved in and seeing how the system treated people differently, it was absolutely appalling. So I understand that people who don't ever see that on a personal level, and I feel bad that people don't understand that always. It doesn't mean that the systems need to be taken down, but to put a blind eye to what goes on, I find very sad, because these things do happen and people are angry for a reason. They're not just making things up. On the same token, or on the other side, that sometimes things get overshot, where you overshoot the target and you start now invalidating your own arguments because you yourself become so politicized that people can't trust you for what you're saying because of your own agenda. So the next idea here to understand is the nature by which this prosecutor is dealing in her own community and working within this framework of the system to try to reform the system. But is it actually working and helping? So let's take a look at this next part and let's try to understand what it's leading to, because all this brings us to this case with the McCloskeys, and in a way how it's overshooting in a way that's going to be very damaging to the mindset of what the initial idea is to bring to light of corruption and how bias works And this is why I say you can't fight bias with bias. You can't fight racism with racism. It doesn't work.
Top prosecutors from across the country are expected together in St. Louis today to expose what they say are coordinated and racist efforts to block criminal justice reform. They're supporting the city's chief prosecutor, who filed a landmark federal lawsuit yesterday against her own city and its main police union. Now, she claims she's being forced out. The union called the lawsuit the last act of a desperate woman. Jeff Pegues is in St. Louis, where he spoke to Chief Prosecutor Kim Gardner in an interview you'll see first on CBS This Morning. Jeff, good morning to you.
Good morning. Gardner is the first African-American circuit attorney here in the city of St. Louis, and she will be joined here today by 7 other black prosecutors, black female prosecutors from 7 other states who say they have experienced similar attacks as they try to reform police departments in their states.
This is not about a single case or issue facing the city of St. Louis prosecutor. This is the fair administration of justice.
In the new lawsuit, St. Louis Chief Prosecutor Kim Gardner alleges her civil rights were violated. The 32-page document cites the Ku Klux Klan Act, a rarely used law passed soon after the Civil War. It alleges the city and its police union attempted to intimidate, silence, and sideline her from bringing criminal justice reform, including an independent team to investigate all police-involved shootings. But the police union has pushed back against that.
Yes, they have.
The complaint alleges the Officers Association had gone out of its way to support white officers accused of perpetrating acts of violence against African-American citizens. It includes the case of Michael Brown, the teenager who was black, was shot and killed by white police officer Darren Wilson. Wilson was never charged and later resigned, but the lawsuit says the police union leader was outspoken in his support for Wilson. The fact that you're filing this lawsuit, is that not a sign that you're losing this fight to reform?
No, it's a sign that we're not going to lose a fight to reform.
You think so?
It's a sign that we're going to promote the will of the people. And we want to make it where other reform-minded prosecutors who come after us are able to go even further than what we're able to do.
In her complaint, Gardner includes anonymous threatening letters she says she received last May after hiring an outside investigator for a criminal case against former Governor Eric Greitens. Greitens was accused of computer tampering and invasion of privacy. All charges were dropped, but he resigned. Public officials, they get hate mail. Is what you're receiving different, you think?
Yes, it is.
The lawsuit also highlights a watchdog report that identified more than 400 racist and offensive posts by current and former St. Louis City police officers, something we reported on last year in a CBS News investigation when we spoke to a 19-year veteran of St. Louis City PD. Do you think that there are white supremacists on the police force?
Yes, I think so.
You didn't even pause.
Have you seen some of the Facebook posts of some of our suspended officers right now? Yes.
We asked Gardner about that.
I believe that there are some individuals that have race issues on the police department, but you need to ask the police department, what are they doing about that?
In a statement, the city of St. Louis denied her allegations against it and says it fully expects to be vindicated in a court of law.
This woman needs to go. She's a menace to society.
In a radio interview last September, local police union leader Jeff Rorta said Gardner should be removed.
By force or by choice?
What did you think when you heard that?
I think that was a threat. Rorta is able to speak unchecked without any repercussions.
Well, I don't know if I would say that a person says by force or by choice, that means that a person is putting somebody a threat. I think that means by choice that the person's going to decide, by force, like they're going to be voted out or put through political means. But I don't think it's a threat that you're going to be in trouble, like they're going to come and do it physically. So I find it hard to say that her mindset here makes sense in that area. But there's a lot of things she's saying that have validity. But the question is it being overshot? And when you want to be a person that's going to make change, if you're a person that really has a drive to make a difference and to be a revolutionary, then you have to be above reproach. You have to make decisions that are going to be very easy for people to see, that it's not going to be biased, that you're being very objective, and that you're trying to show people that there's a problem that's legitimate. And I think that there's going to be problems in a couple of seconds about that issue.
And that's not okay.
In a statement, Rorta calls this lawsuit a frantic ploy to deflect attention from an investigation into Gardner's alleged mishandling of the case against former Governor Greitens.
You've become a lightning rod. Have you ever thought about just stepping away, resigning?
I stand on the shoulders of the people who paved the way for me. What if the other civil rights leaders decided it's too hard? Where will we be now?
Now, this is where the problem comes about. Is her job as a district attorney to be a civil rights activist? And this is the question, and this is the part you have to really think about. If you are being a civil rights activist, it means that you're going too far. You're not looking for justice. You're not looking for reform. You're looking for, in a sense, the opposite extreme to a certain degree. And you push to, in order to go from here, you push to go here so that you get to possibly here. That's the nature of being an activist. When you say that you're a district attorney and now you're an activist, then what are you actually doing? Now, to make reform, to get rid of things that are unfair, to bring reform to a system where you see that there is, there's a problem in being equitable, then absolutely. And then what you could do is you build up a consensus. People can get behind that. One of the things that she mentioned about George Floyd was the reason why everybody was in unison that that was horrible murder, because there was no argument about it and everybody was behind it. But now if you start to bring it in to other situations where it's not, where sadly there is a situation in Detroit where people are protesting after a young man shot at the head of a police officer, and they're protesting because they shot the man that shot at the police officer and saying there's injustice here, while it's on video shooting at the head and miraculously missing the police officer's head. And when you do that, you lose credibility to your argument about what you're saying, and you bring out and you lose that goodwill that gets created, and people saying, wait a minute, there's a problem we need to take a look at. Over the years, as I mentioned, I've seen many, many aspects of injustice. And it's sad. But you don't fight injustice with injustice. And when you become a prosecuting district attorney, your job is to follow the law, not to also be somebody that's fighting for civil justice or social justice. That would be inappropriate. It would be like a judge that wants to be a social justice advocate on the bench. That becomes problematic because your role on the bench is to administer justice as fairly as you can. Now, if you could point out to the judge why he's not being fair, that would be appropriate. But not to say, I want to be a social justice warrior on the bench.
It's about standing up for what's right.
Jeff Rorta was named in that lawsuit, but he declined our request for an on-camera interview. As for the private investigator that Gardner hired in the Greitens case, he was indicted last June on multiple perjury charges. He denies that he did anything wrong, but the whole case raises questions about Gardner's conduct. What did she know about his alleged crime? She denies doing anything wrong.
Quite a story, Jeff. A lot of layers.
So when he brings up about the fact that Gardner did something wrong, and about asking that is a very important part of this case.
But let me ask you this. Help us understand, why did Kim Gardner go to an outside investigator to look into Governor Greitens' alleged misconduct, the former governor?
Well, and that is a really good question because it speaks to the bad blood and mistrust between the St. Louis City PD and Gardner. That's why she did not trust the local police force to help in that investigation, and that's why she went to this former FBI agent to help her investigate the former governor.
And then the former FBI investigator then had perjury charges against him, and then it's a question of whether or not now Gardner has put herself in the position for this aspect of perjury as well, which is why it's so important to be above reproach when you want to be fighting for this, which now goes to a next part of something that's even more interesting.
St. Louis Circuit Attorney Kim Gardner is responding on camera to the Missouri Attorney General for the first time.
While the AG continues to fuel the division in the community at a time of great pain, suffering, and racial divide, my response to the AG, I got work to do.
Eric Schmidt earlier today. In it, he wrote that Gardner released every single looter and rioter that was arrested Monday night back onto the streets. Gardner claims that accusation is misleading.
The police department brought to my office a group of 8 individuals involving stealing for prosecution. We need the police to bring admissible evidence to charge. My office cannot issue any case when there is not admissible evidence, point blank.
So Gardner's case of stating that there is no admissible evidence, therefore she cannot charge, and the people arguing that's not the case, and that she's utilizing the position as a means of being able to determine something based upon the belief that she has stated openly that protesters should be able to peacefully be able to protest. But that begs to question is what's reality. And when you are a social justice warrior and you're stating in your position that you're going to be, then it brings to question about whether or not your own bias is being used when you make decisions. And that bias is absolutely something that's on the table as a legitimate question. And then it even gets worse.
For joining us, I'm Samantha Jones.
I'm Steve Savard. We begin with the News 4 exclusive. Tonight, St. Louis's prosecutor is claiming St. Louis City Police held her for more than 15 minutes during a traffic stop.
Police, though, tell a very different story. Then News 4 has obtained video showing the incident. This all comes as the circuit attorney sues the city, police, and police union, accusing them of a racist conspiracy to take her down.
So Kim Gardner is, again, stating how everybody's trying to take her down around her. And she's stating that all these people are trying to destroy her. And she says, listen, they held me for 15 minutes for no reason. Now, they have a video, and they're going to be able to show it.
Tonight, News 4 investigator Chris Nakes shows us what happened during the traffic stop, and you'll only see it here on News 4.
Market Street, the evening of December 23rd.
So, you see the car that's driving with no headlights on. That is Kim Gardner's car, at least according to News 4, and according to the police.
St. Louis police spot this vehicle driving without headlights and initiate a traffic stop. According to St. Louis police, the driver was Circuit Attorney Kim Gardner. Gardner mentioned the incident earlier this month during an interview with CBS News.
I was stopped for no lights but held for over 15 minutes, but I still don't know the reason why.
I was stopped for no lights for 15 minutes, but I still don't know the reason why. Now think about that statement.
Louis
Police
Metropolitan
Department.
PD.
Yeah. But it's okay. But those are intimidation tactics that are used to stop reform.
Gardner talked about intimidation and reiterated her point about the length of the stop with a local radio station.
How long they hold you for?
Over 15 minutes.
Well, she's not talking about it publicly. She's lying about it publicly.
Jeff Rorta represents the St. Louis Police Officers Association. He says the officer did not realize Gardner was the driver when he initiated the stop. According to the video obtained by News 4, the stop lasts just over 6 minutes, less than the 15 minutes Gardner has claimed.
Is it? So the first issue is that you see from the video, the lights were off. So I don't know why I was stopped unjust. I'm being intimidated. I don't think that makes a lot of sense. And again, remember, if you're going to be a reformer, if you're going to want to change a system, if you want to be the one that's going to step up, you have to be above reproach. Because when you do things like this, it makes you look like you just like to abuse power. And again, I'm not saying that that's what she's trying to do, but psychologically, when you put yourself out there that way, and then you fall yourself into this type of trap, and then you start to exaggerate about it, your word becomes very important. You can't fight for something and then also at the same time think that you could do what you like.
Possible she got stopped in 6 minutes, felt like over 15 minutes?
Well, I think when you're the circuit attorney, the facts are not like alternate facts. I mean, I think you got to get stuff right because the stakes are very high.
You can't see it in the video, but Rorta claims an investigator from Gardner's office arrived on the scene and engaged with the officer.
Her investigators showed up, interfered with the traffic stop, tried to intimidate the officer. I mean, I would have arrested him. You just can't show up and interfere with a traffic stop. He should have gone to jail.
According to police, Gardner was given a warning. No ticket was written. We asked the circuit attorney for an interview, but instead received a written statement, which first referenced the night of December 23rd. A second statement amended the date to December 24th, Christmas Eve, the date Gardner claims the incident occurred, which would contradict this video. The circuit attorney says the events of the night in question are worthy of serious attention, and as such, we will not address Mr. Rorda's incorrect account of what transpired. We will note that Mr. Rorda's dismissive attitude and willingness to publicly comment on such a matter without taking the time to gather credible information regarding the events is unfortunate. This serves as yet another example of the biased rhetoric that made legal action necessary against the St. Louis Police Union. Rorda says the officer did nothing wrong and would stop anyone driving without their lights on.
She should have been thanking the cop, not trying to, bulldoze him.
Just to be clear, not only does Gardner dispute the facts provided by police in the union, she is not in agreement on the date of the traffic stop. Police told me the video on the 23rd is Gardner. She claims she was pulled over on Christmas Eve. If more develops on this story, of course, we will let you know.
So here you have a situation where there's a video of a traffic stop. The police are claiming it's her car. Well, you have the video, and they have it like a little bit blurred, but you could actually go ahead and make out license plates on these things, and they'd be able to show the date and time based upon the camera. So arguing this seems incredibly foolish. Also, the ticket itself would have the date on it. So there's the police record of it as well. So the nature of this becomes very problematic, again, when you're trying to make yourself the social justice warrior. And this is the biggest problem of all. It then comes down to her, after not going after protesters, after not dealing with them in terms of the rule of law, because you can't prosecute in terms of the evidence. Now you have the Castle Doctrine, which protects the McCloskeys if they would have shot people. And here you have a situation where this is the place where she's putting the emphasis for prosecution.
Now, in the Central West End couple who confronted protesters outside their home with guns last month, well, this morning, Missouri Senator Josh Hawley is calling for a federal civil rights investigation into Circuit Attorney Kim Gardner. Her office is tasked with deciding if the couple should face charges. Well, Hawley sent the letter to Attorney General William Barr. Hawley says Gardner is targeting the McCloskey family. He says Gardner abused her powers in seizing the guns seen in those viral images. Gardner just responded for our request for comment saying, quote, "It's baseless. Our office will continue to investigate this matter and will not be bullied by a sitting U.S. Senator or anyone else."
To state that two gun owners that have their guns legally on their own property, dealing with a situation where they feel like their lives are in danger, by a prosecutor who's admittedly talked about her desire for social justice as an ideology, allowing protesters to be let go and not being charged, to charge people who are protecting their own property, really begs the question for bias all over the place. And it's very sad that when you want to be able to put something to light, and I would love for our justice system to be put under a light. I would love for people to actually see what goes on. I would love for people to actually understand the nature by which what happens in people's lives and day-to-day situations, and being forced into different things based upon threats and intimidation that are absolutely horrific. But that you lose that when you start to overgeneralize, when you start to make it more, when you start to abuse your own power, and when you start making decisions based upon your own politics and own bias. And then, not only reform doesn't come into place, now it puts a whole distortion on everything you're trying to do. So with that in mind, I hope that you like this video and hit like. I hope that if you disagree with anything I said or anything in this video, I'd love to hear it. Put a comment below. And of course, if you like, you can subscribe, if you didn't, and become a patron to this channel as well by hitting the subscribe star below. And I wish you a good night and good mental health.